Hello, my treasures. It's time for some more Festival of Legends card review. Today, we will be going over the cards from today and yesterday. So let's begin. All right, let's get our groove on with the Druid cards. The first one is going to be Groovy Cat, who is a 2-cost, 2 attack, 1 HP beast. With the Death Rattle and Battle Cry of your hero power, gives your hero 1 more attack this game. This is an awesome card. It is a little bit sad to see this card in rotation once the questline actually rotated out. However, I do think this gives quite a bit of staying power for a attack-based Druid deck, as this is very easily abusable. Sure, we don't have things like Northshire Farmer anymore in order to get additional copies of this, but there should be ways to randomly generate cards like this off of the new 1-drop where you can discover a beast, or maybe some other options that I can't think of right now. You could also use this with Unending Swarm in order to revive it so you can gain an additional 1 attack. It's just so much power in such a small little card that I can't see a world where this doesn't see play. It's very similar to Wildfire that we had for Mage previously. However, this also can scale up with the next card, which is going to be Free Spirit, a 1-cost, 1 attack, 2 HP undead beast. Battlecry, Death Rattle, your hero power gains 1 more armor this game. So between these two cards, you have a way to consistently get a lot of armor and a lot of attack. As long as you're attacking into something with a lower attack than your armor gain, then a card like this is incredibly powerful. And even then, it is still pretty powerful, as it is just a aura that's going to affect you for the rest of the game. It's the perfect 1-drop for this style of deck. You could also use this in combination with Amalgam of the Deep in order to discover additional copies. Same thing with the previous card, where you could in theory get your attack to around 8 damage without having to run something like Unending Swarm. However, I do think a lot of decks who are going to try something like this will probably go down the Unending Swarm, probably similar to the Boar Druid deck that I had posted around the launch of March of the Lich King. Either way, again, really powerful deck. It's going to be really insane trying to keep up with a deck like this, because it's always going to be 2 mana for whatever you increase the stat lines for. And it's amazing we get cards like this while we get cards like the Warrior cards that have been revealed so far, where this package seems to be way more consistent than something like that, and you can easily abuse it. Now for the next Druid card, which is going to be Zotfog Snort, a 7-cost Quillboar minion with 6 attack, 6 HP, Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 Quillboars with Taunt, improved by your hero attack and armor gained this turn. So basically this card, no matter what, is probably going to end up being around a 9-mana minion. However, if you can get your attack up pretty high along with the armor gain you do gain off of your hero power, then this card is incredibly powerful. This is probably just a better Dr. Boom in that style of deck, but honestly, it's a card that I don't think is going to see too much competitive play, just because I'm assuming that deck is probably going to try to play really quickly, and this card is very, very slow for what it actually is, though this is the first Quillborg, I think, since the original Baron set, so that's actually a pretty cool thing outside of Amalgams. Either way, can't wait to play around with this card and the previous Druid cards. And now it's time to go bananas with the Hunter cards. The first one going to be Mr. Mukla, a 6-cost, 10 attack, 10 HP beast, rush, Battlecry. Fill your opponent's hand with bananas. This is such an iconic card from Hearthstone's history. However, every time they bring it back, it never really does anything. The fact that you're giving your opponent so much advantage for so little is not really that good. Sure, this has the advantage of being 6 mana and have a rush and a 10/10 worth of stats, but unless you can cheat this out with some of the next cards that we will be going over, I can't see a world where this does see play. There was also Faithful Companion where you could cheat this out with that, but I do think King Crush would be just a much better target, and there are quite a few other really big beasts that fit the role very similar to this without having to maybe sometimes give your opponent a lot of advantage. So, speaking of cards that might make this really easy to use, next one is going to be Big Dreams, a 5-cost spell that summons the highest cost beast from your hand. It goes dormant for 2 turns. So this in combination with the previous card is really, really nice. It does allow you to get basically 1 mana cheat on it. However, the one upside of this card is the fact it doesn't trigger his really terrible battle cry. And since we do have things like Faithful companion. That in combination with this could in theory be really, really powerful if you use it in combination with another classic Hearthstone card, King Crush. I don't think Mr. Mukla is probably going to be the card that you're going to want to use in a deck like that, because if you can actually use this in combination with King Crush, you may or may not be able to OTK your opponent in 2 turns, depending if you can survive that long. However, the problem with a lot of these big beast hunter decks is the fact that you're going to be having to survive for 2 additional turns before you can get all your beasts out, which sadly makes a card like this a lot less playable than you would normally expect it to be. It does have potential if you can get a lot of really powerful minions within your hand, but it does rely on you to being able to survive, and we don't really have too many survivability tools in Hunter currently to make a card like this playable, in my opinion. So for the next card, we are going to get another big beastie, Banjosaur, which is a 10 cost, 5 attack, 6 HP beast, rush. Whenever this attacks, draw a beast, gain its stats. This card's artwork is funny. I never thought I needed a dinosaur playing a banjo artwork in my life, but here we are. This card is great, at least from an appearance standpoint, though I don't know how playable this is going to be in the long run. If you can cheat this out with some of the other cards that do currently exist in Standard, such as Ajar Saber, then this card could be incredibly powerful because it should let you, in theory, draw into some other very powerful beasts that you might have in your deck. But if you're relying on a lot of cards like that, you're also going to have to run a lot of cheaper beasts, which means the boost isn't always going to be worth it. Though if you can hit something really, really big, then this card could get big really quickly. And given the next card we're going to go over, might make a Devilsaur Hunter deck be a thing. The next card is going to be Stranglethorn Heart, a 10 cost legendary spell for Hunter with tradable. Resurrect all friendly beasts that cost 5 or more. 2 really cool things about this card. First of all, it has tradable. This is the first legendary spell with tradable, and maybe even the first legendary ever with tradable. I can't honestly remember. Either way, this card looks incredibly good. Sure, it is going to be a little bit slow. However, it does allow you to hard target a bunch of really high cost beasts, such as things like King Crush or getting additional copies of King Crush. Then you just slam this down on turn 10 and then finish off your opponent after they think they're safe. A card like this should be playable in a lot of big Hunter decks. Sure, a lot of the other previous cards that we just went over might not really see too much play in that style of deck, but this for sure will see some play somewhere, as long as there's King Crush in Standard Hearthstone. Alright, well, let's have the beat drop with the new Mage cards. The first one being Keyboard Soulless, who is a 4 cost, 2 attack, 4 HP Naga. Battlecry, if you control no other minions, summon 2 1/2 amps with spell damage plus 1. So in a Naga deck where this would normally fit, this is actually probably not that good of a card. Nagas specialize in swarming the board, especially with the Siren that gives you mana refresh whenever you do play down a new Naga or a new spell. So using this in combination with that doesn't actually work. However, if you're going to try to use this in a different mage deck, such as Arcane Mage, you could in theory get 2 additional spell damage on board, which isn't actually that bad. I will say for the new mechanic of Soulless, this is probably one of the better ones. However, that doesn't change the fact that 90% of these are just really, really boring and really, really bad. The main weakness I would say with this card in particular is the fact A, anti-synergistic with Nagas, and B, the fact that the amps only have 2 HP, which makes it incredibly hard to actually get any advantage off. So let's go to the next card, which is going to be Audio Splitter, which is a 3 cost, 4 attack, 3 HP mech. Death Rattle. Copy the highest cost spell in your hand. Hey, this is actually a pretty good card, at least for a arcane based deck, because we don't really have too many big spells in Standard Rotation anymore. The ones that come to mind that we still do have are things like Pyroblast or the Arcane Defenders that we got in the previous set. Either of those cards are pretty decent targets, especially given the fact we do have DJ Mana Storm that can easily abuse those cards. However, the one thing I will say about this card is even though it does feel like it would probably fit best in a big spell mage deck, you could in theory just use it in a mage deck where you're trying to use a very few number of key selected spells in order to discount all the cards in your hand or just do a bunch of face damage. There's a lot of possibilities for a card like this. It's extremely flexible, and given the next card, which is probably going to be one of the better targets, a Light Show, a 3-cost arcane spell. Shoot 2 beams at enemies that deal 2 damage. Shoot 1 more for each Light Show you've cast this game. Hey, this is basically Pogo Hopper except as a spell. This is actually a really cool spell design-wise. However, there are some really fun little interactions that you could in theory do. The previous card is a great way to get additional copies of this. However, if you use this in combination with the legendary from the last set, because it is an arcane spell, you in theory could get 2 casts for the price of 1, which is actually pretty good. Also have to look at the fact that you can generate this off of things like School Teacher, so it would be the perfect opportunity to do so. You could just fit this in a really nice arcane Naga deck without hurting the consistency factor that much. It also scales really quickly, like Fellfire in the Hole, where you're actually getting additional spell damage if you're using any spell damaging minions within the deck. And since we did get a Naga that does give you spell damage, this should in theory be the perfect card for that. The next card that got revealed is a Rewind, a 2-cost arcane spell. Discover a copy of another spell you've cast this game. Perfect card with the previous card to use in combination with it. It's another way to actually consistently get more light shows, which is really, really good. And I think that is probably going to be one of the main win conditions of Mage when it comes to this new rotation. It's also really cool to finally see a class mechanic supported for 2 sets instead of just 1. It's been so long since we've seen a deck supported in 2 individual sets instead of just the main set and whatever the mini set actually is, because unlike a lot of the other class mechanics that we've seen in previous sets, Arcane is just such a generic thing that they could easily support it once again. Now let's turn it up with Volume Up, a 4-cost spell that draws 3 spells. Finale. Discover a copy of 1. Has the Arcane tag. You could in theory use this in combination with the previous 2 cards to keep getting additional copies of a Light Show, which could be really, really fun to try out. A lot of the really good arcane synergy that already existed in March of the Lich King also doesn't rely on you running any spells within the deck itself, which means a card like this is going to be even more powerful since you can easily target the key spells that you want to use in your deck. The only problem this deck is going to run into is you no longer have Siphon Mana in order to discount all the spells within your hand, but given DJ Mana Storm, that might be enough to make this deck fully functional. And now let's fight over some Priest cards. Fight Over Me is a 4-cost shadow spell that reads, choose 2 enemy minions they fight. Add copies of any that died to your hand. Hey, Thief Priest support. Thief Priest really needed that much, however, it is a pretty decent 4-mana removal spell. It does also overlap with the Shadow Priest deck, as you can easily use this to remove any key taunts from your opponent's board. There's quite a few ways that you could easily abuse a card like this. Sure, you're not going to always be able to get the additional copies, but that's not what you're trying to do most of the time, depending on which deck you're actually using this in. If we look at some of the other removal that Priest does currently have access to, such as Cannibalize, sure, that allows you to actually heal a little bit in Shadow Priest, but this does give you more advantage, and that's probably where it's going to fit in the end. Now for the next card, which is going to be Shadow Chord Distort, a 3-cost shadow spell. Give a minion -5/-5. If it has 0 attack, destroy it. So this card works as a double removal. Anything below 5 HP is automatically destroyed because it'll go into the negative HP and thus be gone that way. However, if you somehow do manage to target a minion such as one of the dragon aspects where they have 4 attack, 12 HP, you could also destroy those too. There's not going to be too many cases where the second part of this effect matters too much. Now for the last Priest card, which is going to be Love Everlasting, a 3-cost holy spell. Your first spell each turn costs 2 less. Lasts until you don't play a spell on your turn. I don't know why they're printing a card like this. Why? We don't need more mana sheet. We just got rid of the Radiant Elemental in Priest. We didn't need something like this. Also, fun note about this card, it stacks. So if you somehow manage to generate additional copies of this card, you could in theory discount any spell that you play first on each individual turn by 4 or even higher. The card that really comes to mind is Visions of Darkness from the Legendary in the previous set, where you in theory could just get a free copy of one cast of that, which could be absolutely bonkers depending on how you're actually building your deck. Sure, it isn't going to be as strong as Radiant Elemental, but as long as you can guarantee the fact that you're going to cast a spell on a given turn, this card is incredibly powerful. And given that Priest tends to be one of the more spell-heavy classes, I can't see a world where this doesn't see some type of play. Alright, let's hip-hop our way to victory with some rogue cards. First one is going to be Harmonic Hip-Hop, which deals 1 damage and then gives your weapon a +3 attack. Swaps each turn. So this should mean it does 3 damage on one turn and then 1 damage on the following turn, and it swaps back and forth. It has the Shadow tag, has 2 cost, which makes it actually pretty playable in a Miracle style rogue deck. If we have a really powerful weapon that we want to buff up so we can use it in combination with a card like this will be even more powerful, but most of the time I'm assuming you're probably just going to want to use the direct damage because there is enough spell damaging minions within standard Hearthstone for a card like this to see some play with that. It doesn't easily replace Garroot, which we are going to be losing in the rotation, but it should be playable enough where it will see some play somewhere, especially given the fact that the next card, Mic Drop, is a 3-cost draw 2 finale. Give your weapon +2 attack. So we're seeing a lot of attack gain on weapons, even though a lot of the poisons are actually going to be rotating out. It is kind of sad to see Weapon Rogue finally get some support after it rotates out. This is probably going to be a pretty decent card because it is just a draw 2 no matter what, and you in theory could use it in combination with something like Preparation in order to discount it to 1 mana, and thus always getting the +2 attack gain no matter what. There's a lot of flexibility with this card, and it does give you a lot of advantage, which I think this card is probably meant to serve as a replacement for Sprint in the core set. Either way, it does look really cool, and I actually really love Weapon Rogue, so I can't wait to try something like that out once again. And now that we've dropped the mic, let's bring out the MC. A Blingtron, a 5-cost 3 attack 4 HP mech legendary minion for Rogue. Battlecry, both players equipped 1-2 microphones. Your opponent increases all damage they take by 1. At first glance, this card is not that good. However, if you use this in combination with our old friend Shadow Step, you have the possibility of discounting this to 3 mana. And the new Amplifier minion that raises your max mana to 11. You could use this in combination with Astalor in order to do 28 damage instead of 14. Just what we needed. A way to replicate Brand's Bronzebeard without having Brand's Bronzebeard. Instead of facing a bunch of druids who can do this max combo, it's going to be a bunch of rogues, which is always everyone's favorite deck to play against. You in theory could also use this in combination with the new legendary spell in order to bounce everything back if all your minions do survive. There's just a lot of potential damage that you could actually do with a card like this, given the fact that it does basically essentially make your opponent take double damage from anything that does 1 damage per hit. It's very similar to the 1-drop minion that Priest actually had access to that should be rotating out once the set comes out, if I remember right. And while this does cost 5 instead of 1 mana, this is incredibly broken. There's a reason why they made it 5 mana instead of 1, because if they tried to make it 1 in Rogue, there was something that was absolutely going to break no matter what, and it does just pinpoint the problem being Shadow Step once again. Now let's rock out with some warrior cards. The first one going to be Drum Soloist, which is a 5-cost, 5 attack, 5 HP dragon taunt. Battlecry. If you control no other minions, gain +2/+2 and rush. I really just don't like the soloist mechanic. It just doesn't feel good to play. It's one of those things that they introduced that will probably never be revisited, even probably in the mini set. And each individual one of these cards feel incredibly boring and only rely on you to have an empty board. And most of their effects aren't really that strong to want you to make yourself have an empty board so you can get that bonus effect off. This card costs a little bit too much. It doesn't shock me that Warrior is getting way higher cost cards than they really should. I think From the Depths is probably hurting the playability of a lot of cards within a Warrior, and that's something that a lot of people are forgetting about, that you can easily mana discount a lot of these cards. However, because all of these cards by themselves are just quite unplayable in my opinion, I don't know why they don't try to do something else with the warrior class. Warrior as a class feels the most outdated of all of the classes in current Hearthstone, as it doesn't feel like it had a revamp at any point throughout its history, and I don't know what you would do to try to solve the fact that it feels outdated, because Warrior sadly still feels like it has to go into fatigue to actually win out the game. And now for the next Rockstar, Razorfin Rockstar, a 1-cost 1 attack, 3 HP Quillboard. After you gain armor, gain 2 more. Hey, we know why Armor Smith actually rotated out, because this in combination with Armor Smith would have been absolutely broken. However, this also does point out the new key identity that Blizzard is trying to push within Warrior, which is very similar to what they tried to push in Paladin in the new mini set. Menagerie Warrior, a deck that hasn't been really a thing for about 2-ish years, ever since Dark Moon Fair actually rotated out. Deck was actually kind of popular back then. It was actually pretty fun to play. It always is fun to play around with a bunch of different tribes and the incidental synergy between each individual one. Either way, I do think this card is playable. It's a perfect 1-drop for any type of warrior deck where you're just going to want a hero power on turn 2, because it then makes your hero power give you 4 instead of 2. Though compared to some of the Druid cards that we earlier went over, I think this card is a lot less playable than some of those. Now for the next card, which is going to be Power Slider, a 3-cost 1 attack, 2 HP, Rush Battlecry. Gain +1/+1 for each minion type you've played this game. We have enough amalgams in standard Hearthstone where you can consistently get a lot of different tribes out, even if you're not using a bunch of tribal synergy, which is actually pretty cool. Amalgam Warrior probably is going to be the default deck for the class. It's kind of sad that this doesn't have some type of tribe on it too. Maybe they could have made it into like an undead instead of using a orc or a troll. I can't really tell in this picture. This card is also easily comparable to some of the other cards that we've seen in this set, where they gain +1/+1 for doing some side of mechanic, such as Snakebite in Demon Hunter. However, I do think this one is a little bit worse just because of its higher cost. Now let's look at a card that will get you Roaring. Roaring Applause, a 2-cost spell that draws a card. Repeat for each minion type you control. Hey, this card in combination with good old amalgams, as mentioned before, is actually pretty consistent. However, this is just basically a worse impending catastrophe, which is really frustrating to say, but I do think it is one of the better cards that Warrior is getting within this set. Having a lot of draw power has always kind of been a weakness of Warrior, so they can't really fit in a aggro-based style of deck unless you have some type of way to generate a bunch of additional resources, such as the questline that is rotating out. I don't know how strong Amalgam Warrior is going to be in the long run. However, I do think it has enough potential for you to want to run a card like this. Now for the last card, which is going to be Rock Master Voone, a 4-cost 4 attack, 3 HP. With the battle cry, copy a minion of each minion type in your hand. This is one of those cards that I don't know if it's really good or really bad. The problem with this card is the fact that, sure, it's trying to recapture the original effect of a Voone, where it copied each individual dragon within your hand, but apply it to a Menagerie Warrior deck, which in theory could be incredibly powerful if we get enough neutral cards that actually Warrior can use within their deck. But that's a very big if, because a lot of the cards that currently exist in Warrior are not going to want to fit in a deck like this, and we are going to be losing a lot of the pirate synergy that Warrior easily has access to. This also does explain some of the core card choices that they did make for the new rotation, such as Sword Eater or Dinomatic, because those both in theory could actually fit in a deck using this card. However, I don't know if you'd ever want to use Dinomatic. Either way, I do think this is incredibly powerful. I'm curious of how this works with all the amalgams in Hearthstone, if it's just going to count the amalgams as a all tag, or if it's going to count the amalgams as a random tribal tag, thus allowing you to actually get copies of each individual amalgam in your hand. I will say though, it is amazing to me that Warrior's main win condition that is rotating out Mr. Smite, who is a neutral card, is going to be replaced by another 7-drop neutral card, aka the new 7-cost amalgam that gains random effects depending on how many minions you actually place down. Alright, so those are all the cards that were reveal today and yesterday. Let me know down below which ones you're most looking forward to using. I can't actually wait to use some of the new Druid cards or even some of the new Warrior cards, even though they look kind of bad. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.